Let me do this. Great. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to you. My name is Victor. I'm coming to you from Johannesburg, Bryanston. I'm part of the Africa Brand Summit, which is now in its 4th year, established and founded by Mr. Solly Moeng, whom I call President Moeng, because once a president, always a president. And Mr. Moeng was the president of the Public Relations Institute of Southern Africa, and so I was the president, as well as Mr. Tshepo Matseba. So we are all presidents. So Mr. Harpal, Randawa, you are basking in the presence of presidency.
Thank you. I feel extremely honored. I feel extremely honored. If I was wearing a cap, I'd doff it now.
Great. Right. We do this because of very interesting number of reasons, one of which is we like being robust about issues, and that is President Moeng. We like being disruptive because it's through disruptive conversations that we'll be able to unearth and come up with real core issues and don't massage issues. So we have a slight theme that we run with, that we don't call a spade a spade, but we call it the big spoon for turning the soil upside down. So that's what we do. Turn the soil upside down. We're very robust in our approach. And the monthly webinars are a continuation or a follow-up from the national or from the annual Africa Brand Summit conference that we have. The topics that come out of here are some of the topics that came up in the main summit that we had, and the topics that are coming up and the interesting issues that are being raised here, we build it up towards the Africa Brand Summit next year, scheduled for next year, the first week of May. We're really looking forward to not only have you as our guests, but look at possible partnership opportunities with some of our guests. To host us today is Mr. Tshepo Matseba, but before I hand over to him, few house rules, which I know I'm preaching to the converted. Let's keep our mics muted. If you'd like to say something, you can raise a hand, or you can just ask to be excused to say something, and then we will also fill the comments and questions on the chat. And the good news again is that we've got a lot of people that have been waiting to get us started. We are live on the Africa Brand Summit Facebook page as we speak. Mr. Matseba, I wouldn't like to waste too much of your time. I would like to hand over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Victor, for the opportunity. It's good to be named amongst presidents, the 3 musketeers. It would be far more fun, I was saying to a colleague the other day, to have a female on this panel to actually add a bit more energy and life to the session. But here we are. My name is Tshepo Matseba, and I'm not gonna do a lengthy introduction of myself, but to start off with the context of the conversation why we are here. There's an ongoing conversation globally around minerals in Africa and and other resources, including energy, and the extent to which Africa seems to have a wealth of what one could say God-given or given by the mighty one somewhere. But Africa often does not actually benefit from these resources, and Africa does not often recapitalize fully on the resources for various reasons. When I was doing research the other day, I picked up that Africa actually remains one of the largest exporters of minerals globally. If you look at minerals such as platinum, Africa leads the pack. The question now is, what is the reason why we are where we are at? What is the capacity? Is it the issue of skills? Is it the issue of political or will or lack of political will? Why are we battling to capitalize on the wealth that is in the continent of Africa? Joining me for the discussion is Harpal Randawa, and he says he doesn't actually care what you call him, provided that he can actually make sense of the fact that you're talking about himself. From Harare, he is the chairperson and founder of the Global Emerging Markets Group, GEM. LinkedIn tells me that he's also the partner at Sabri Capital Worldwide. At present, I'm told GEM's main interests are real estate, private equity, venture capital, industrial assets, natural resources, and others. Ladies and gentlemen, and it is on that note that I'm going to ask Harpal to actually just provide perhaps set the scene for us with regards to the topic at hand, and you can take 5 to 6 minutes just to provide that context so that we can spark the discussion. I'll be interchanging for now between yourself and Mr. Soli Moeng, who is the founder and convener of the Africa Brand Summit. Over to you, Harpal.
Great. So Tshepo, tell me if I'm going on too much. I'll try and stick to the 5 or 6 minutes. The topic that we're talking about today is one that's been discussed extensively. And you were quite right, and everyone who's spoken was quite right to say that our continent is massively blessed with minerals. And of course, one of the issues with the minerals that we've been blessed with is that we have to ask ourselves the question on whether they have been hitherto a blessing or have they been a curse. So we were, amongst other things, we were colonized for the minerals. And leaving the politics aside, because I have no politics whatsoever, but that sort of slowed down the progress of the continent for all the people of the continent in favor of a few. And after that, even when sort of the old sort of form of colonization went away, the continent's been basically seen as a source of minerals. And so everyone has come into Africa really to benefit principally from minerals. Now, thank God, increasingly from many, many other things that 1 billion wonderful Africans are doing. So yes, it's a blessing. It's also a curse. Now, let's stay positive. So let's talk about the blessing. As with anything that anyone produces, and I'll take an extreme. So we're talking about minerals. Let's just talk about services, human beings. Human beings produce huge value. We always want to add value, right? And we are living in a world that is today a knowledge world. All value in the world is accreting to knowledge and moving away from labor. So every human being, and then I'll go back to minerals, has to focus on how they become purveyors of knowledge, not of labor. And knowledge, so there are various stages. So you can have education, you can have skills, you can have information, you can have knowledge. And when you get right to the top, you have wisdom. And so every human being on earth, including us 1 billion Africans, need to become purveyors of knowledge. So we need to add value in the services that we provide in whatever we do. Well, just take that, which is so obvious to everyone, because everyone is scrambling all day long, everyone on this webinar and in general. And this webinar is an example, is precisely an example of this, that people who join this webinar are here to increase their knowledge so they can use the knowledge. Well, we should do exactly the same with minerals. Minerals are by definition have a finite amount, and they are also scarce. So once they're basically gone, it takes millions and millions of years for them to be produced again, by God, Mother Nature, whatever you are thinking of. So every time we produce and sell, whether exported or not, I'll leave for a moment. It doesn't really matter. A mineral in its sort of as close to nature form, we are losing a permanent opportunity for our continent because we should be beneficiating that mineral. Now, we have not really been beneficiating our minerals very much at all, right across Africa. And even frankly, South Africa is, of course, by far and away the most advanced. But even in South Africa, but if I just take examples, if you take oil producing nations like Nigeria and Angola as example, both of them have historically exported crude and imported product, as an example. And that's true also of gas. They have exported LNG and rather than turning it into things. Now, any statement I make is obviously not 100% true, but is directionally correct. Now, of course, in Nigeria, Dangote and others are putting up refineries. The original small refineries that had been built by the government never worked for other reasons. And as we move through every mineral that this continent produces, the most exciting thing in the continent today is what's called the 4 E's, right? So let's call it industrial metals. More commonly known names of those are nickel, copper, and the platinum group metals, platinum, rhodium, etc. Now, as you know, and of course, lithium, and those who are lucky enough to have it, cobalt. I'll come back to cobalt last. These are all, as we now know, battery minerals. Their prices are up 500% in the last 4 years. So if you look at the companies that mine them, they're doing extraordinarily well. But they are basically exporting them in a, let's call it semi-finished form, right? Africa is not as yet producing batteries. It is producing battery minerals. That is, of course, the most exciting part of the mineral story in Africa. The question really, I've just stated the obvious. The question is why? And if you talk to the world and say, guys, why are you not coming in here and investing in beneficiating minerals? And they will give us many reasons, and some of the reasons would be good and other reasons would be less good. They will talk about lack of skills. They will talk about political uncertainty. They will talk about lack of transparency. They will talk about the cost of doing business is very high. For instance, Africa's cost of producing gold is 40% higher than gold is produced at in North America. I just gave you an example. And so they'll give all these stories. But at the end of the day, who is to blame? Actually, it's not, I was saying to Solly in a casual chat we had, actually, it's only we who are to blame. Because if you look at a counterpart, the counterpart is going to act in their best interests. And their best interest is to reduce their risk as much as they can and get their return as quickly as they can. And the way to do that is to come in and buy the minerals and take them elsewhere for forward processing. We are the ones who are to blame because we all agree. I haven't said anything that 100% of people don't agree that we should beneficiate. Well, we can't be waiting for others to do it. We have to create an environment which makes total sense. Now, again, this is happening. So Aliko Dangote is confident enough to refine crude in Nigeria when his refinery opens. I hope that will have a positive impact on the Nigerian economy. He did that in cement. And there are stories floating around, and the venture capital scene in Africa now is quite exciting, and I know Rob Hersoff's heavily involved in that, where people are possibly going to start creating the very, very high value added. So we are obsessed. I was at Ministry of Mines all this morning, and we're always obsessed that we want to take a product as far as we possibly can. But that requires all of us to create an environment in which that can happen, because that means you are investing for the long, long, long term. It is infrastructure. It is not trading. It is infrastructure. The last thing I'll say, because I'm sure I've already run out of time, is that one of the biggest disadvantages of the current approach that we have is there's actually very little exploration that's going on in Africa. Very little large scale exploration. So because the environment people perceive, doesn't lend itself to that, because things keep changing. And I use the word perceive because it may not be true, but it's certainly a perception that the environment keeps changing. So I think in summary, there's no question that whatever we do, whether provide our own services and sell services, we should be selling knowledge and wisdom, or minerals, we should be beneficiating them. I strongly believe we are to blame, because the only people who can make a difference is us. The only people who have the motivation to make a difference is us. And therefore, I think we, as Africans, need to show the lead and do it. So I think I've run out of time. I could probably go on a bit, but I'll come back when you ask me to come back, Tshepo.
No, thank you so much. I think the whole discussion around infrastructure becomes fascinating, because it then begins to compel an ecosystem of business and the public sector to start talking seriously about minerals in SA and in Africa. And as we say, it's not really even a question of training or skills alone, but infrastructure. So there's money and investment required to make things happen. But one may ask, with that as a backdrop, who benefits currently and in recent times from African minerals and resources?
Well, obviously a lot of people benefit. At its most basic, I guess we also benefit as a continent, because there's some employment, there's lots of taxes, and there's lots of foreign exchange earning. The question is that enough, or can we do better? And of course, my view is we can do much better, as long as we create the right environment to do better. The other beneficiaries are completely obvious. The other beneficiaries are the industrialized nations of the world. Now, there are very few industrial nations left in the world. One of them is China. China is the factory of the world. Not even India. China is the factory of the world. And so, as the factory of the world for everything on earth, frankly, they need raw materials. And those raw materials include energy, which they take from, amongst other places, Africa, and the minerals, right? And so the energy comes in many forms, including, of course, in coal and oil. Then minerals, you start with iron ore. In South Africa, Botswana, I saw Botswana's now started exporting iron ore, right? So then chrome, right? Basic. And then you start moving up the value chain once you're done with the bulk commodities, coal, iron ore, chrome type. Then you start moving into these battery minerals and gold. So So it's the industrialized nations that are the beneficiaries. I think the fact of the matter is that the Chinese economy, the export-based, and even for their domestic consumption, has been the single biggest beneficiary from what Africa's goodness is. That's for sure, because they have re-exported, obviously, the end product, but they've only been able to create the end product because they've had the source. Now, Africa is not the only place. Of course, they have imported iron ore from Australia in a very, very big way. And also coal from Indonesia. But while we're talking about Africa, then the number one historical and continuing beneficiary, because even in battery minerals, even in the EV race that's going on, and mobile phones, because, while the very fine people who join webinars like this sort of hang around with sort of Apple and Samsung and all those phones, but the truth is that by volume, China consumes and exports the largest number of phones which use a lot of these battery minerals and precious metals like gold and others in their circuitry and in their storage. So China is beneficiary number one, and by far and away the greatest. And then now, all eyes are also infrastructure, because coal and iron ore have gone into infrastructure. Where has the biggest infrastructure spend been in the last 2, 3, 4 decades? It's been there. So some India, lots in China, couple of other countries in Asia. But actually, in a way, I don't think that's the relevant conversation here, because if I'm selling something that I have added as much value as it is possible to add, I'm completely indifferent on who buys it, as long as I get the best price. So I would say that our focus should not be so much on how the Chinese have benefited enormously from having a very nice supply chain of minerals from Africa. Our focus should be what can Africa do to add more value and sell a more value-added product to the Chinese. It's perfectly fine, nothing wrong with that. Let's just not sell it in its raw form. And that needs infrastructure, for example, power. And we're heading into some of the biggest headwinds. This continent is heading into this extraordinary headwind where even China has gone and said to the world that they're going to be net zero by 2060. And one of the things that they've said in being net zero by 2060, and I have no arguments against net zero, I have no arguments against a cleaner world, and with COP26 coming up and so on and so forth. But they've said now that no more coal anywhere in the world except in China. Well, we will have to do some serious running here in Africa to replace, but more importantly, just catch up on our power requirements with renewables, solar, wind, hydro. Of course, is something that I hope we can, benefit from enormously, because it's big and it's 24/7 and it's reliable when you've got a decent flow. And then newer technologies, maybe green hydrogen as a result of that. So we have to get that energy thing right. We have to make sure that our rules don't change as often as they do. We have to make sure that people feel safe in investing in beneficiation at source, at mineral source. My conversation this morning in the ministry was about, turning lithium or turning spodumene into lithium carbide, battery grade lithium carbide. What we do in Africa is that we give a concession on something to someone for the wrong reasons, rather than to the person who can actually turn that product into its finished form. and therefore then we have a lose-lose, because nothing happens to that product because the person who got the concession can't do anything. And even when they one day succeed, they're only sending out raw spodumene. And in the meanwhile, or and in the meanwhile, the people who can do it aren't able to do it. So I think the fixes all lie with us. Really hard to do, but they lie with us. And while China or other countries in the world are beneficiaries, I think that's really irrelevant, because we shouldn't be looking at, it's very negative for us to say, oh, we're being exploited, because let's say we are being exploited. We're only being exploited because we're allowing ourselves to be exploited. One of the questions I'm often asked when people see my face and they say, oh, you're an Indian, do you resent the fact that the British ruled you for so many 100 years? And what I say to them is, I say, look, it's just a statistical fact that at their peak, there were only 70,000 British people in the Indian subcontinent ruling 500 million Indians. So do I really blame the 70,000 Brits, or should I blame the 500 million Indians? So there's no point saying, oh, we were exploited and they raped and pillaged the country, which perhaps they did. Well, the 500 million Indians allowed it. The billion Africans, to the extent that anyone is taking advantage of us, we are allowing it. And we're not allowing it because we are stupid, because no one is stupid. We're not allowing it because we're illiterate, because I don't know many illiterate Africans. I've been in, well, not all 54, but some 40 countries regularly. I don't see many stupid people, and I don't see many illiterate people. But I often see people who are lazy. I often see people who don't care. I often see people who don't have passion. I often see people who want to get rich quick. And the same way that people lament that some of our chiefs gave up our lands to colonizers for nothing. Well, we're doing that today. But we're not doing that because, as I said, because we're stupid and illiterate. We're doing it because we just want to get a quick buck. And until we stop wanting instant gratification, we won't do anything long term, because beneficiation is something you do over decades. You don't do it overnight. So I've turned your question a bit, Tshepo, with your permission, I hope, to say it's really not relevant to me who's benefiting. I want to know how we can benefit. That's all I care about.
It is a leadership challenge, especially when you look at Agenda 2063 and the Africa we want, and the ambitions that we state there as Africans from the African Union perspective. I see Soli's hand. Soli, I want to bring you in. In doing so, we were talking about hydro and energy, and when you look at yesterday I was complaining because when it comes to this load shedding that we go through in Southern Africa, at least, it gets frustrating to a point where you can do nothing but complain. And a colleague was saying, but this is a norm on the continent. That if you go to Nigeria, actually people are surprised if you complain about load shedding, because it's sort of like a norm. So it looks like Africa has a lot to do in terms of its leadership capability. Soli, I'm going to hand over to you, and then I'll call on Moeng just after yourself, Soli. If you can unmute, please.
There you go. Thank you very much. This conversation worries me because we're talking about beneficiation as if we're talking about the fourth industrial revolution, which is starting now. As Africa and African countries have been free since the 1960s, at least the bulk of them. Okay, South Africa was free in 1994. And you mentioned, Habla, earlier that big mining companies or those who extract minerals pay taxes, which is true. but we don't see where that money goes. I think that, you know, as Africans, we need to look a bit more closer into the mirror. And I like the fact that you're saying let's look at what we can do better instead of continuously blaming others. Because a lot of the negative stuff or not good things that have happened to Africa, we're enabled by Africans, and it's a difficult conversations for Africans to have. So if we invest more in beneficiation, which we should have started long ago anyway, more people on the ground would be benefiting. More businesses would be benefiting from the minerals. But now if we rely just on the taxes that are paid into governments, often run by corrupt people, that money disappears. So that's why Africans will constantly be asking, but why is it that we don't see the benefits of these minerals? Because the money it does get paid. I mean, a lot of these companies do pay their taxes. In South Africa, they do pay taxes to government, but where does the money end up to? We don't know that. So something has to change. We have to democratize, and this is my question. Don't you think there's a need to democratize the way mineral resources of Africa are used so that more people other than governments benefit directly from them?
Right. So I think 3 points. One of the tragedies, so every country has a program for small scale miners, of course. Every country has other programs. For example, the BE program in South Africa, which has made rich people richer and not much more. But anyway, there are programs. The problem with democratization of mineral wealth is only one. Minerals are sadly a scale game. So they take a long time to discover. They take a long time to develop and take a long time to earn returns. And especially if as I believe we were beneficiating them. So basically, small-scale miners, in all the countries that I see them, and I travel around Africa, and my neighbors are small-scale miners, I increasingly find they're actually modern-day slaves. They are working for some mafia boss because there are economies of scale, and they are basically working for a mafia boss. Democratization of the actual revenue is really very much a political issue rather than a mineral issue. And my simplistic answer also is that only we can blame ourselves if we're not happy with something, because theoretically anyway, we could change it with our vote. But what would you do? So you'd say, okay, we're collecting billions and billions and billions of dollars of royalties and billions and billions and billions of dollars of corporation taxes and customs duties and so on and so forth. So let's democratize that. Well, how do you do that? Because do you send every citizen a dividend check directly? And government would say, well, that's not practical because we need this money to run the machinery of government. And that's where the wastage starts. And I think we all agree that, and not just Africa, by the way, I'm sorry, this is true everywhere in the world, that the largest part of government revenues are totally wasted, sometimes also stolen, sometimes also abused, but almost always wasted. The alternative model is to try and encourage people, because it always comes back to, in my opinion, this being our problem that only we can solve. So if we could encourage more entrepreneurship amongst normal people. So for instance, we have programs where we encourage small-scale miners to be semi-independent. Semi, because we want to ensure that they are 100% safe. We don't want anyone to be getting injured, and we don't want them dying, which I'm afraid is all too common. That's where their semi-independence comes, where we want to have enough systems in place to protect their health and their safety. But other than that, they're independent, where their productivity determines their outcome. The issue that becomes on that is really quite sad and requires a lot of work, is that people come along and they work for 2-3 weeks and they get what they consider to be a nice sum of money, and they disappear to spend that money. And then they may turn up again a few weeks later once that money's run out. And why they're doing that? Because sadly, they don't feel they have much of a future. And these are not issues for your webinar today, but their view is that there isn't really any future, so we'll continue to live hand to mouth, right? We'll do some work, get some money, consume it. When it's finished, go and do some more work. And until we start until we change our attitude and ask people or allow people to do more than survive, most people in our continent wake up in the morning and they do what they need to do to survive that day. They don't have any plan. And frankly, they can't have a plan, because even the biggest companies can't have a plan, because we change the rules of the game very often. But I'm interested really in, especially in webinars like this, I'm interested in the individual, the African individual, and then collectively the billion, right? So it's really quite difficult, because one of the attitudes that we have to really change through, and then within that, what we're trying to do, but too little, we'll still do it and we'll do more and more and more, is to see if through our programs we can create some change in the thinking of the people, so that they can actually think, they themselves can think beyond today and tomorrow. And if we can get them thinking even 1 year ahead, and then by some chance 5 years ahead, and then by some chance 20 years ahead, we now have a different continent. Okay. I, for instance, nothing to do with me, but I'm just illustrating. I have no interest in consuming anything in my lifetime, right? Look, I'm wearing a shirt and some clothes and things, and of course I'm not hungry. You can see I'm massively overweight, but I drive a $1,000 car, literally, incidentally, and I'm not really instant consumption. And because luckily I'm not instant consumption, I can think very, very long term, because I'm not waiting for today's or tomorrow's paycheck or dividend or whatever. Now, the average person has obviously an infinitely tougher life than I have. They have no confidence whatsoever in the system in all our countries. Because they have no confidence in the system, they basically make their own plan, and their own plan is a plan of a daily existence. So democratizing minerals is hard, because it is very, very capital intensive, and it's very, very long term, and there are economies of scale. Can you do something about the income stream from minerals? Well, you can, but it's back to then just fixing governance altogether, right? So amongst the better examples in the world is Norway, right? Norway has the highest per capita income in the world. It has recently, in the last 60, 70 years, become rich through minerals, through oil and gas in the North Sea. And they are they're solidly interested to hear they're even more expensive than Switzerland, because they're even richer than Switzerland, much richer. I was in Norway 6 weeks ago, right, on an acquisition we are trying to make in that country. So they have a kind of a socialist model, and their politicians are not really politicians, they are professionals. And they choose politics as a profession for a period of their life. And so they go in and they serve, and then they come out, but they are not looking for power. It's not driven so much by power. Of course, they have voting and different parties and so on and so forth. But generally, they are now. In our case, in our democracies, until we can take a long view of the governance, the revenues are going to come to government. I mean, the constitution, I think many of you on this call are South Africans. And if you read your constitution, which I've had occasion to read for good reason, it gives the government certain powers that are basically they're allowed to step onto human rights in relation to collecting revenues, right? Because the perception is that government is there to govern. And in order to govern and in order to provide so-called services, they have a carte blanche to collect revenues. And that's the only place in the South African Constitution that government is given special rights, but there are two places. One is collecting revenues, and the second is the defense of the realm, right? So the mere fact that extraordinary powers are given to executive through a constitution, at the end of the day means if you've then got the wrong people, wherever, however, whichever country that you wish to, I don't think there's an easy answer to that, because the revenues can only accrue to one place. And then unless you can adopt the Norwegian model, it becomes very difficult, because what are the models in the world? There's the sort of the G8 type model, let's say United States. United States, a big mineral country. Canada, big mineral country. And some European countries, big mineral countries. Their model is there is a perception amongst us. I use the word perception, that there's probably less wastage and theft in those economies than there is in our continent. And therefore, more of the money they collect goes to developing the economies and the people, and their social contract is therefore better. And, Obamacare and all those wonderful things that America still has in a beaten up America. Then you can take the Norwegian type model or the Japanese model. Japan is of course not a producer of minerals, but you can take those models where the state is run in a kind of quite a professional way. You can take the Middle Eastern model of having kings and queens, but they have very small populations to start with, and then they have extraordinary resources per capita in those populations. So I think I think it would be very hard, Solly, but I want to be educated, because just because it's hard doesn't mean it can't be done, to find a way that you can, democratize mineral revenues. You certainly can't democratize mining, because things I explained, high capex, high opex, super dangerous, super big environmental issues. So what do you do about the revenue? And like you could say, I mean, you could, but at the end of the day, the governance would have to be good. So let's say a mining company had to pay 100 Rand. They could say that, look, 25 rands out of that 100, or maybe even 50 would be amazing. But let's say 25 Rand must be spent, should not be reported back to Pretoria, but should be spent in the communities in which you are, in schools, in clinics, in local infrastructure, in holistic education, in women's empowerment, in all kinds of things that would benefit. Governments are never going to allow that. They'll want all 100% to come to the center, and the center can of course be the province also. I just use South Africa to be any country in the world, frankly. So that's my view on that. I think.
Yes. Thank you so much, Harpal. While we are on that democratizing resources or democratizing the revenue, I'm gonna invite Moremo Kholo to ask the question. I saw your hand earlier, Moremo Kholo, and then I'll call Victor Sibeko. Moremo Kholo.
Thank you, Mr. Matseba. Thank you, and good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you very much to Brent Ambassador, Brent African. Oh, how I wish I was in Switzerland. My organization that I'm so in love with is called PRISA, the Public Relations Institute of Southern Africa. I'm an ambassador for it. It's now trending on my Facebook page. I have a few questions. Yeah, I have a few questions. I'm gonna ask them, and HSR, you'll then decide whether to answer them. Please don't answer them all now, but I'm just gonna say them all out anyway. The first question that I have is, what can you say about the impact of illegal mining in the mineral sector in Africa, South Africa, and the world? That's the question. Second one is, when you talk about Norway, I'm happy that you mentioned Norway. I studied in Norway, and Norway was declared by United Nations as the best country to live in. I did my MPhil in Norway, so I know Norway very well as the best country, and I like that you use the comparison. I also had occasion to visit Japan and spend 6 months in Japan. When I was on sabbatical, I worked for De Beers mining company as a public relations manager. So we went on a Diamonds for Development campaign, and we met Chaim, who's an Egyptian writer who's written a book, Diamonds and Their Mistresses, etc., etc. So I got to meet countries of the world that are producing minerals across. And we went to Namibia to visit underwater mining of diamonds. We went to Canada as well to see how they're mining diamonds in Canada. And Japan, that you mentioned, becomes the second on top of the triangle, the second largest buyer of Botswana's diamonds. And like Mr. Moeng was saying, where does the resources go to? And well, first is Japan, and then it's the US. That's the question. When you mention environment, and Mr. Matseba was saying environment, taking care of the environment, my mind quickly went on to the Rio Plus 20 commitments by member states to save the energy. What can you say about the failure to comply to the Rio Plus 20? Is it enough to have a policy? Are these policies therefore working? That's another question. And why is it taking, that's a different question. Why is it taking so long for South Africa to go into green hydrogen? Why is it taking so long for South Africa to use alternative energy sources? I mean, we have issues with Eskom, etc. But why is it taking African mineral sector to adopt use of solar energy when we've got abundant, like 4.5 hours of sunshine per day? Why is it taking Africa so long? What is the challenge right there? The other question is, I love the fact that you mentioned China as the factory. I spent 7 years in China and I began my PhD in China. So it's a country that I know very well, and I know how the air is so polluted because of the coal. And so China is taking the lead, and China is the factory indeed. But when you go to Beijing, when heads of states are coming to Beijing, they start to clean the air just to make Chaoyang, which is like Commissioner Street, to make Chaoyang Street very, very clean. They'll clean the air temporarily, and then you get on your prompt on your watch, your smartphone, how the weather will be. The other question that I have is for you is, what challenges face artisanal and small-scale mining in South Africa? Compare that with Zimbabwe, where you are. So you don't have to answer all these questions, but thank you for a brilliant question, and thanks you to PRISA for organizing this as always. I'm sitting in my car because it's lunch hour, and I'm going to be having a lesson just now. I'm in my car because I couldn't miss this for $1 million. Thank you so much. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Moremo Kholo. Victor, you had a question. Perhaps let's take that question before we hand over to yourself, Harpal Randawa, also known as HSR.
Thank you so much, President Matseba. I am load shedding. You can see I'm now sitting in the back.
Oh yeah.
I'm load shedded, and thank goodness I still have battery life and I have a portable modem. I hope it will last me. Mr. Harpal, so much you've said which has answered some of these questions, but I just want clarification from you. Here's a scenario. The miner, who is the one that mines these precious minerals, is the worst off and the poorest, because it comes from the rural areas, comes into the cities to mine. The owner who own these mines are the richest, filthy rich for that matter. But then there is a community from which these minerals are mined from. Okay, now there is a role that is played by government. Is this a common trend or a common phenomenon where the people who really do the mining are worse off and people who own are the best and they've got everything? How do we address this? And I think it's throwing me back to President Moeng's question. How do we work around this and leveling the playing field? I know one has to work, one has to be the boss and one has to be the employer. It's a very delicate one, especially when we talk about Africa. Thank you, sir.
Right. Let me just start with Madame. Madame, commiserations for 7 years in China, but Norway and Japan, I'm sure, made up for it, and we're in the diamond business, and must have been very educational to be at De Beers, including in marine diamonds and things which we're also involved in. You raised a number of points. I think that the main issue is illegal mining is a big problem, but the biggest problem to me with illegal mining is people get killed, people get hurt, people get maimed, and families get destroyed. So before I even get into the economics of illegal mining, we have had to pull out many times dead bodies from illegal shafts. And the worst thing is, those weren't even individuals who were working for themselves. They are modern day slaves. So illegal mining means no safety concerns whatsoever, no respect for life whatsoever. The economic consequences of illegal mining are there, but the reason I'd want illegal mining managed, first and foremost, and I talked about it earlier, is I think that it encourages slavery of the worst kind, modern day slavery, where poor, helpless people are willing to do anything on earth without considering the risks that they're facing. So that's why I think illegal mining needs to be managed and turned into artisanal mining if possible. Let me move to artisanal mining. I've already said the problem with mining, forgetting Victor's points about the richest and the poorest, which I will deal with Victor properly. The problem with artisanal mining is only one: very, very high capex to discover and to produce. Now, artisanal miners can make a living by doing artisanal mining where there is surface ore. And there are many places where there's surface ore, and they can sort of make a living on that surface ore. But none of us here are happy about how cobalt is produced in DRC under the guise of artisanal mining. I mean, we're certainly not happy to see children there. But besides the fact that we're not happy to see children there, we're also not happy to see adults working in horrendous conditions with absolutely no dignity whatsoever. I'll just speak for myself. I'd rather starve to death. Now, I know if I have children, then I would do anything for my children. So artisanal mining, I think, has to be organized in a way that there is lots and lots of health and safety and protection, and some, I don't even know if it's appropriate for me to say it, but for instance, to me, generally the artisanal miners are men, and even when they earn their money, they either drink it away or they do something else away, and the families don't see any of that, any of that money. We, for instance, try and organize it so that the family is fully involved. That's very important. It's not our job. And it's not our business, but we really want the whole family to be lifted, and this is not sexist, but more often than not, the artisanal miner is a man. Incidentally, in our companies, you should know 40+% of workers are women. And they're doing the jobs you'd least expect women to do, i.e. every job in the company. But so artisanal mining is a wonderful, wonderful concept. But the word artisanal, as you all know in any language, I'm sure, really lends itself more to crafts. It lends itself to crafts. You can be an artisan in producing something, say cutting a diamond, for instance, right? But not necessarily producing the diamond, as an example. So I think that we have to look to get people, but I still feel, and I said it earlier, I really don't want our billion people earning a living in the way that they might be today. I want them to be turned into knowledge workers, because they're unlimited knowledge-based jobs, whether in minerals or in other things, but including in minerals. And so artisanal mining is, I think it's more a political thing than a reality. Green hydrogen and solar, you're absolutely right. Solar is now cheaper than coal to produce from. A megawatt of solar capacity costs only $500,000 to install. You said 4.5 hours, madam. Some places it's over 7 hours. And it's not just the 4.5 or the 7 hours. The irradiation is just fantastic in our continent. And in particular, in the southern high-felt areas, it's just extraordinary. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Why? Is very, very simple. Because there's a lot of corruption in the middle. And corruption isn't just government. Corruption could be me trying to steal money. And so many people are just not willing to do something unless they make extraordinary amounts of money. So when I've seen solar projects, I'm still seeing them coming in at up to $1.2 million a megawatt. They should be coming in at $500,000 a megawatt. And so, we've got to start by sort of looking at the regulatory aspect of this. In South Africa, as you know, there were all these auction rounds and different tariffs were offered at different times. Solar is going to be amazing for Africa. Wind is going to be not bad. Hydro in certain places is going to be incredible. And we are trying in our tiny little way to become a carbon neutral mining company by using solar during the day and hydropower at night until storage becomes viable. As far as the rich and the poor point, Victor, it's kind of a tragedy of life. And if I can leave mining for a second, all of you on this webinar are clearly incredibly well-traveled people. And so we sadly see this have and have-nots thing in every industry, in every geography. The difference actually is coming from knowledge. What's happening is that all value in the world, whether we like it or not, thanks to the technology catalyst, is all accreting to knowledge. Everyone on this call, even though I don't know all of you, is a knowledge worker. I am a knowledge worker. All of us on this call are knowledge workers. And all the value in the world is accreting to knowledge. The reason, whether temporarily or long-term, your fellow South African, Elon Musk, is worth whatever, $265 billion as of today, is really because of his knowledge and the way he, by knowledge, I don't mean a Tesla car or SpaceX or Solar City, or that he goes into Bitcoin and then, does other things. I don't mean any of those things individually or collectively. What I mean is that the guy has a way of painting the future and convincing people that he is well on his way to that future. And he even has some people convinced that he will finish his life, finish his days, I should say, on Mars, right? That has given his company a $1 trillion+ valuation, not a Tesla car per se, or anything else that he does. So the only way in the law of nature to close gaps, we can't do it by taxation, because we've already decided that taxes, even when collected, are stolen or wasted, largely. We can't do it through regulation, because we can't insist that whatever jobs we do on this webinar are done by people who are currently begging on the streets, because they are not as yet able, not as yet, I said. I hope they can. And I would like everyone on earth to make me redundant and unemployed, right? But until they have that knowledge, they can't really do my job, even if they are put into that job. India, when it became a republic in 1950, came up with what sounded like some very interesting laws in its constitution, a little bit like South Africa, but only different. And so like South Africa has B and so on and so forth. They came up with all these laws 70 years ago for reservation of places in schools, in colleges, in universities, in jobs, and this, that, and the other. It's never lifted those communities. It just became a method of corruption and largesse, because the members of the communities that it was intended to benefit were completely ignored. Because now that you've given a SOP, and in a way, South Africa, if I might say so, and I hope people understand, is similar. By having given a couple of little SOPs like B and this, that, and the other, the basic needs of the community have been completely ignored. And I'm not political. I have absolutely no affiliation to anyone or anything. But it's a matter of fact that because we've said we have the SOP and we'll give some handouts and we'll do some B programs and we'll do this and we'll empower here and we'll empower there. The truth is, it led to exactly what you said, Victor. A few, including President Ramaphosa, had the knowledge and they benefited from that knowledge. And the rest didn't even in the last 28 years get proper schooling, right? So I think that we have to be very careful. There's only one way for us to make the poor miner and the rich owner, well, we'll never make anyone equal, because I'd like to be thinner, taller, and better looking, right? And look like some of you that I see here. Well, that's not going to happen anytime soon. And so no more than I can be thinner, taller, and better looking can everyone necessarily be Elon Musk or whatever people are aspiring. But what we can do is to bring everyone up to a certain level. And after that, I think human endeavor varies, because on a webinar like this, you have a lot of people who are doing well, trying to do well, working to do well. That's human endeavor. So as long as we don't think we can work our way around human endeavor to create equality, I think we can certainly make sure. And in my personal life, because my work is my sideline, is I have a view that the only way to bridge, Victor, that gap and many other gaps is through knowledge. And so I'm always trying to see how someone can do a bigger job than they are doing. And so you give them the chance to do that bigger job. And then they either succeed or they fail. But you give them the chance. And then the bigger job, and then the bigger job, and then the bigger job. So I didn't deal with all your questions, Madam, and nor perhaps Victor, but that's some of the things that I think you both talked about.
Thank you so much, Harpal. Very insightful, very quite robust. I'm going to ask some participants on the audience to field questions, if any, and while they think about their questions, one of the things that was happening in my mind as I was listening is where to from here, just in terms of what are the things that we can do meaningfully as leaders in the short term and at least to the medium term to address some of the real pressing challenges that you are talking about. And a lot of what you've said has to do with the question of leadership on this continent, in every part of this continent. The other question I had was, is there anyone, and when I say anyone, is there any country here on the continent that seems to be getting things right in terms of appropriately adding value to the minerals, so that they can be exported at a higher value, as we were saying? Or are we in such a dark Stone Age environment that there's no hope?
Can I just say something before Tshepo, before you take it on? Just a quick one. Look, I know that you're not political. You keep saying that, but we have to talk about leadership. We have to talk about priorities, policies. I mean, in Africa, as you say, we have wonderful people meeting in forums like this. It's happening all the time. There are others meeting elsewhere, and we say all these intelligent things about what could happen, what should happen for Africa to be a better place for everybody. But the thing is, the people with all these wonderful ideas are not the ones who make policies. They're not the ones who determine where the budgets are going to go so that we can invest in skills and giving the people that chance of making it. The basics. Now, we often hear in South Africa that maybe the ANC government is deliberately keeping people uneducated so that they can control them. I wouldn't know if that's true, right? We don't know if it's inadvertent or if it's part of a bigger plan. But surely we can't keep having all these smart conversations all the time, but not having access to the people who must hear these things and hopefully make a difference in the way in prioritizing budgets and policies so that the African child can become better able to stand up on his own, on her own, to face the world, to stand up, shoulder to shoulder with others in Norway, in China, in Japan, isn't it? So there's something wrong with our priority, with leadership in South Africa, in Africa. And I know you're not political, but please talk to this.
Okay, no. Look. The basic problem we have in Africa, and there's other countries that have this problem, including, for instance, India has this problem, and I'll come back to why it's also making a little bit of progress. We have no respect for human life, and we have no empathy for our fellow human being. And so until whoever is in leadership, including us, because we're all doing things and all influencing things, until and unless we choose leaders who have empathy, right? There's a very famous Persian poet that many of you have read called Rumi, R-U-M-I. And he spoke about many things, but one thing Rumi spoke about was leadership. And his definition of good leadership was a clear vision of where she or he is leading the followers to, and absolute compassion for the followers. Okay. Now, until a leader of anything, a leader of a family, I mean, for God's sake, forget government, has a clear vision of where they are traveling to and has compassion for those that are following. And just to give you, just to make it slightly more interesting, Rumi's was thinking of the leaders of the caravans that used to go through the desert, you know, the camel caravans. Remember, they had no GPS. And of course, they didn't have motorways, highways, whatever. Right. So basically, anyone following the leader was completely at the mercy of the leader, because the leader may never pass water and they would die, right? The leader may make the journey 2 months longer and they die of hunger. So it was a serious dependence on the leader of that caravan, right? And that's what Rumi was talking about. A very clear vision of where you're going, and absolute compassion for those who choose to follow you. Because remember, when we vote, we choose to follow the person to whom we give a vote. That's what the vote is. I will follow you. That's our promise, mutual promise. So at the end of the day, I can be non-political or political, it doesn't matter. Just like I said, we are to blame, including me, for not beneficiating minerals, let's say. We are to blame for our leadership because we have what we've got. On the other hand, I am not totally and utterly pessimistic, because I think that the young of Africa are now different. And it doesn't really matter too much whether they appear to be different in a militant type manner, because they appear to be angry. Well, they are angry. They've had some, they've been treated sort of not very well. Or they are basically different because they're getting on with it. And they have said, we're not interested in you old fogies, we're writing you off. There is a hope that these people, and you guys know the demographics better than me, or at least as well as I do. I do a lot of community work, by the way. I work a lot in communities personally. I don't mean like money, but I go and hang around communities a lot. So I meet some of these people. And when they kind of become the voters, maybe they will have better sense than we have had. And we'll see. The fact of the matter is that regardless of the fact that our biggest problem in Africa is that our 1 billion people are badly off, I continue to believe that the greatest resource on earth is the human resource. It can be incredibly valuable and it's renewable, right? And all one has to do is to find the methodology of turning it into knowledge. And knowledge is not, of course, just school and matriculation and a university education, but it's real hardcore knowledge about what's going on in the world. Where is this world going? So none of our leaders are concerned about that. They are just concerned about absolute trivia about how do I look, right? How can I look better? And I'll apologize to our host organization, who, of course, part of your purpose is to make people look better. But at the end of the day, the best way to look better is to be better, and not spend all your time trying to look better when you're not getting any better. Right. So my view is, I live opposite a primary school of 600 children, which I walk past, run past early in the morning, drive past many times a day. I see all these beautiful children. And, I'm a funny sort of person. One day I saw the gate of the school wide open. And I walked in and I walked straight into the headmistress's office and I started, in a very polite way, giving her a very serious message. And I said to her, I said, Mummy, the gate is open. There are 600 little children here. Don't you think they should be protected? What if I'm a bad person and I walked in and I start influencing a child or even pick up a child or give them an ice cream and take them away? Because there's no deep concern about these 600 children as we might have of our own biological children. But I could see that there was a very substantial risk that we might have 100 children playing in the grounds, and this gate is wide open, and there's no security and no protection of these children. Now, my point is that, obviously, initially she wasn't happy. We became best of friends. Later on, she and I, and we made friends very easily, and I've been working to a little bit, mentor her, if I might say that. But until you care deeply about the welfare of those 600 children, those children don't have a chance, because the future of those children is not in the books. It's in the fact that someone cares. Now, I have a very large education business. It's an edtech business. And the key thing is edtech can now solve this problem for us easily, because teaching is a calling. Teaching, perhaps preaching, certainly nursing. These are callings. You can only do them well if it's your calling, if it's your métier in life. You can't do it well for a salary. So there is a permanent and growing shortage of teachers in the world, which is why our population is growing in the world, and our children are being neglected in every which way possible. And that is the biggest risk that humanity is facing, in my opinion. Now, thank God we have a solution, because what I'm saying is, and the world is saying this, not me, I'm just a tiny little participant in what's going on, is that the human beings who we call teachers, 99% of whom are not teachers because they don't have a calling and they just do it because they can't get another job, those people should now be recategorized as minders, coaches, leaders, mentors, guides, but not instructors. And the instruction we will deliver through technology, right? So because the beauty about delivering instruction through technology is I can deliver exactly the same education to every child on this planet of the same standard as the best in the world, at an approximately zero marginal cost. If I was an African leader, which sadly I'm not, this is where I would put all my attention. I wouldn't care much about defense. In the short term, I wouldn't care much about having 200 embassies around the world to occasionally get a grant or some kind of aid from someone. I wouldn't care much about so many things that we waste our time and effort. Because I know that in 20 years only, 1.5 K-12 generations, 1.5 only, we will change our society. We'll be Norwegians. We'll all be Norwegians. I mean, not that we all want to be Norwegians, but I'm just saying, in a manner of speaking, we'll all be Norwegians. If we don't fix that, why do we all want to be laborers? Because that, even if we are, is only getting worse and worse and worse. Why, yes, it'll fix a short-term problem, and we must fix that short-term problem. But minerals and nothing is going to fix the basic problem that we need to prepare our children, our youth for tomorrow. And it's only going to take 20 years to change. And 20 years is nothing. Nothing. It's like, it's not even a dot. And it goes like this, right? So if any of you really want, and you look at your sort of program in South Africa, which, President Ramaphosa, actually, I met with him many times on this Adopt a School program, etc. I think we've got to bypass. We've got to bypass. It's not going to work. We've got to bypass all that, and we've got to reach these children because there's plenty of science on this subject, and that everyone is born, except for a few who are differently abled, but everyone else is born with an equal opportunity on gaining knowledge. It's a scientific fact that if we don't get to them no later than they are 4 years old, and really work with them from the ages of 4 to 8 to basically make them inquisitive and put their brains into search mode, then the brain, which works on the principle of zillions of connectors, which work on use it or lose it, by the age of 8, if they haven't been stimulated, they start disconnecting. We then proceed to very rudely call these disadvantaged people stupid. They're not stupid. And this is the problem with the poor miner, Victor. The problem with the poor miner is not that he is poor, but he is guaranteeing poverty to the next generation, because when children are born into his or her family, they're receiving absolutely no mental stimulation to go into search mode, rather like missiles that are heat-seeking. All of us on this webinar were lucky. That's all. We were lucky that we had that opportunity, and we are all now sort of, here with the luxury of attending a webinar instead of worrying about how we're going to feed our children this evening. So if that sounds too theoretical, I'd like to apologize to all of you, but it's the only way that I know. And it's not, even if Mr. Malema, for instance, becomes the president of South Africa, the biggest dividend is, well, that's political comment. Okay, I don't have an opinion. I don't have an opinion.
You won't.
I don't have an opinion. By the way,
that's interesting.
Yeah, I met Julius, and he's a fascinating human being. But anyway, the point is that even if he does, the biggest return he'll earn is if he focuses all his time and attention on making our people knowledge able. That'll be the biggest dividend. All other stuff, I don't care whether you are Mr. Malema or you're the other extreme. There's only one thing that's going to give us a return, and that is we have to bring knowledge to the masses and not just to the elite. In fact, the biggest form of discrimination that exists in the world today, including in Africa, is that very few are getting this holistic knowledge. And that is actually the worst kind of discrimination, because money can be earned, but if you can't get that child going well before the age of 10, you have disadvantaged that child for life.
Thank you.
That's really our biggest challenge, I'm afraid.
Yeah, thank you so much for that contribution, Harpal. As I can see, Soli wants to say something.
Wow.
We are about to...
What a way.
No. I don't know what's happening to President Victor Sibeko. Are you around? You were disconnected because of ESCOM. like he's not here. Look, thank you very much. It's been a truly exciting discussion. I've seen the comments from other people on the site there. We didn't manage to respond to every detail of every comment that was made, but it's very clear that people appreciate this topic. Like I say, we don't really want to just talk, go home. With the Africa Brain Summit, we usually provide or develop a report at the end of every year. This is the first time that we're doing this in monthly webinars. So it's going to be quite a challenge to summarize all these webinar outcomes into a report for 2021. But we're going back to our normal event next year. And the aim of it is really, as Victor said earlier, is to have uncomfortable conversations about Africa. And this is not just to talk, feel good and go home. And we also, and the reason for providing a report at the end of the Africa Brain Summit is to make sure that those people that we're talking about, the leaders who have access to policy making structures and to budgets, also get to see it. Whether they take it seriously or not, we cannot force them, but at least we want to know that the things, the outcomes of these discussions, the concerns, the recommendations that come out of these discussions reach the people that have the power at least to do something about them. So we really, really appreciate it. We appreciate all of you guys having taken the time today. Tshepo, Matseba for making this discussion, for facilitating the discussion. Thank you very much to all of you. Please remain in this community of the Africa Brain going forward.
Thank you so much, Solly. And it's on that note that we would like to thank you for us as our keynote speaker for your insights and passion and commitment. And I want to also extend our thanks and gratitude to every one of you who participated, and acknowledging Dr. Makowa, Temba Tovela from Government Communication and Information System, Mr. Lance Gibbons, and Alec Jones, and anyone that I haven't mentioned. We love you all and proudly African, and let's continue with this conversation. All the best. I can't say thank you enough to our keynote speaker, Harpal, better known as HSR.
There's a Jessica there who seems to be wanting to say something. Jessica, do you want to say something quickly? Jessica Lucas?
Sorry, I didn't want to say anything. I was just clapping hands to say thank you and well done.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Harpal.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
I'm most grateful. All the best.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
The last webinar for the year will be around the first week or the second week of December. That will be the one to say goodbye to the year that was. And we will keep you posted. We will send you all the information. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Cheers.